समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
After a week of utter chaos for passengers across India, brand IndiGo has come crashing down. But not before a mountain of questions have arisen as to why the government allowed IndiGo to compromise on safety and rolled back global safety norms that every other airline in India was able to implement except IndiGo. Nobody is asking the question that is the elephant in the room. If IndiGo had 2 years to implement what are global norms for rest periods for pilots, why did it not hire the extra pilots that were needed to make this particular norm be met? Is the reason that they had one eye on their bottom line. In other words, they just wanted a bigger profit. In Parliament today, the Aviation Minister vowed that strict action would be taken by the government against IndiGo. There is no evidence of that yet. In fact, everybody is outraged that instead of acting against IndiGo, the government and the aviation regulator basically rolled back the norms, giving IndiGo more time. What happens next? Can we really afford as a country to compromise with safety? Because remember, these norms exist across the world because they're directly related to airline safety. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo story. The images that you see on your screen have been felt or experienced by either you or somebody you know in the past few days in India. Absolute and utter chaos. A wife who could not get the coffin of her husband home. A couple who could not reach their own wedding. Students who missed exams. Hundreds of thousands of baggage and luggage that haven't made it back to those who owned them. This chaos occurred because IndiGo failed to meet a global requirement for safety, which is that pilots must have adequate rest time. They simply did not hire the extra numbers they needed to make this roster possible. It is important to note that every other airline in India was able to implement these norms. IndiGo has responded to the show cause notice from the aviation regulator, the DGCA, claiming that it is unable to identify any single trigger for why this chaos took place, saying that it needs more time because there was a domino effect and a series of things went wrong for it. But what happens next? I think what's important to understand here is that this is not, and I've been saying this from the first day, this is not some technical aviation debate. This is quite simply about you and I being assured that when we board a flight, the person who's flying our plane is well rested according to global safety standards. That's what's being flouted right now. Before we play out what the aviation minister said in Parliament, let me introduce three very distinguished guests today as we look at what happens to brand IndiGo, what happens to flight safety, and why heads have not rolled so far. Joining me is Wing Commander Sharat Panikkar. He's been a captain with Air India. He's also flown the Dreamliner, the very controversial Dreamliner, for many years. Good to see you, sir. Also joining me is Air Force veteran Dr. Praful Bakshi, Wing Commander retired. Good to see you, sir. Always a pleasure. And joining me is the guru of all things brands and image, Dilip Cherian, really in a way the father of branding in this country, and what a disaster it has been for brand IndiGo this week. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm going to quickly play out for you an excerpt from the statement of the aviation minister on the floor of Parliament. He promised to set an example so harsh that it would be an example for all airlines, which was a little bit of a confusing statement because all other airlines do not need the reprimand. They were able to implement these norms. Everybody did except IndiGo, but this is what he said. Take a look.
We are doing an inquiry and we will take very, very strict action, not only for this situation, but also as an example. We will set an example for all the airlines. If there is any miscompliance, any non-compliance or non-adherence, for any single person, any entity or any organization or any operator functioning in this civil aviation, this thing, we will take very, very strict action so that we set an example in the industry.
And the truth is that the aviation minister himself has some tough questions to answer. The government surely should have been monitoring the situation. They should have been prepared for what played out at airports. What was the aviation regulator doing? There has also been a suggestion of conflict of interest with suggestions that those in DGCA required to make an assessment of IndiGo are not neutral. Many of them have links to the airline. So frankly, if heads have to roll, it's across sectors. It's in the aviation regulator. It's in the airline itself. And many would argue that it's also in the government. Let's get going. Before I come to an aviation perspective, just from a brand perspective, Dilip, nightmare scenario for the airline, poorly handled, bringing out a sort of foreigner CEO who seemed very far removed from the emotions that most people went through at airports, and also not really addressing why this happened when they had 2 years to implement these safety norms. How do you see it from a brand perspective, Dilip?
The brand of IndiGo has been damaged quite severely, and this will be the recurring motive whenever IndiGo is mentioned. It is not going to be able to take this and pass it over. It's not something that will be forgotten. The second thing is that, if you ask me, as you just said in your introduction, other airlines had the same amount of time and they were able to comply. So everybody in the business and in the aviation business knows that IndiGo was offered multiple opportunities to train pilots, and they had adequate time, but they refused all offers to have more training facilities for themselves. So it was an act of willful omission that they were doing. Number three, the biggest culprit, in a sense, is the regulator. What was DGCA doing? DGCA should have had timelines on how each aviation company would have to be recruiting pilots to make up for the norms that they had put in place 2 years ago. So in a sense, they were complicit in this criminal act of negligence towards the citizens of India. But the image of Indian aviation has also taken a hit, because the world has seen that Indian aviation regulator is weak, and Indian aviation companies are willing to cut corners and make corners where corners don't need to exist.
One of the very strong statements you said, Dilip, before I open it up, you said the DGCA is complicit in this criminal action, and it's very important to say criminal what has happened. It compromises on safety, quite apart from causing enormous physical, social, and economic distress to passengers.
If you look at safety, if you look at safety, we've already had the situation of Air India and the crash and the confusion around black boxes and who was liable. So DGCA must recognize that it is a regulator. It actually comes even above the ministry as far as the airline companies are concerned. It is charged with the duty of independently regulating the sector. And if it is not capable of doing that, then the fault actually begins there. Companies, both the management and the board, are liable for the kind of stuff they've done. But the fact is that the signs were out there in the marketplace much earlier than this fiasco actually happened.
Let's open this up now. I will bring you, Wing Commander, both Wing Commanders. So let me start with Dr. Bakshi first. How do you see it, sir?
Thank you, Barkha. Thank you very much. This aspect, I have been noticing it for a very long time. But other airlines did take positive steps. And the pilot fatigue matter, the involvement of aviation medicine advice matter has been very long associated with civil aviation. There is no doubt about it. But IndiGo failing, let me start. India has aviation sector. IndiGo is not in charge of aviation sector, it is DGCA. It is DGCA which makes the rule and calls the shot. I cannot say my subordinate did something which I don't know. Now I will inquire. That is not the answer. The very fact DGCA knew, and if DGCA does not have the monitoring system, they have to change the system. First thing, DGCA must put in professionals in the job. They must do. I'd all advocated long back. I mean, I shouldn't use the word. I have suggested a long back that DGCA must produce an independent autonomy body of professionals. They should do the regular civil air staff inspection of all the airlines and all the aviation aspects of India, not only airlines. That is what we are missing. We think that airline flying is the only civil flying. There are so many other things. But here, IndiGo is in question. The question is, DGCA knew that they have a recruiting problem, deliberate or non-deliberate, whatever the case may be. They should have intervened straight away. They should have had the authority to ground the airline, but they cannot ground it because I know it very well. They don't have the replacement. That is why my suggestion would be to DGCA for future that please work out with Air Force. Earlier, you do the better. We used to have auxiliary Air Force at one time. Barkha, till 1960 it was there. Auxiliary Air Force actually did lot of work, even providing to pilots to the airline, pilots for the civil.
But Dr. Bakshi, this is not about a shortage of pilots. They had all the time to hire more pilots. They could have taken pilots on contract.
But question is, I am telling you, Barkha, why the shortage of pilot? Why DGCA could not do? They could not even know when to exercise their authority.
Absolutely.
The person
So I think
sitting
both
out
you,
there, he does not know when to exercise authority. He thinks everything is good. So nobody to tell him.
Both you and Dilip Cherian have made the point that the regulator has failed. The regulator has clearly failed. And now for the regulator to also respond to, how this should be fixed, I don't know, because the regulator itself is in the line of fire. Captain Panikkar, what I want you to do is explain to our audience why this is directly a flight safety issue. Obviously, the stranded baggage, the people not getting home, not getting to funerals and weddings is awful. But this is actually about flight safety. This is about those who fly the planes being rested enough for there not to be a safety issue. Until the public understands that this is not about one company and one aviation debate, it's actually about all of us, people will not understand what's at stake. So could I ask you to do that and then give your take on the issue?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on the show, Barkha. Now, let me take you back a little bit as to where all this actually started. This started off with an ICAO directive in the form of a SARP. SARP stands for Standards and Recommended Practices. ICAO Annex 6 Part 1 deals with how to manage fatigue. Fatigue is an issue not just with airlines. It's an issue which regulators all across the globe have grappled with. So all these inputs were available to ICAO, and they have their expert committees which sits down, evaluates all the responses, and formulates a suggested course of action. Now, this suggested course of action is sent to all the 195 countries that come under ICAO in the form of the SARP, the Standards and Recommended Practices. Each country examines the SARP and converts it. First, it examines it, sees the applicability, and if it is applicable or if it is something that they do not agree with, they can also do that. And they finally implement it in the form of a law. In India, this law comes in the form of a CAR, or a Civil Aviation Requirement. The Director General of the Directorate General of Civil Aviation is empowered with the authority to convert this SARP into law via the CAR. So the CAR that refers to fatigue management or fatigue risk management system is what we call the CAR 7J Part 3 or 7J3 for short. This deals with pilot fatigue, and an adjacent CAR also deals with the fatigue conditions of the crew. So now, fatigue is recognized as one of the major factors where aviation safety is concerned. Because the pilots have to have the capability of being alert at all times during their duty period, the regulators across the world are unanimous in their concern that pilots require adequate rest. Normally, this
And
is split,
yeah, sorry.
in the region of about a week. So now what this particular car had sought to do was to increase the weekly rest from 36 hours, which included 2 local nights, to 48 hours, including 2 local nights. This was the major change which has come about in the car. If you remember, the car had first come out in the beginning of January 2024 with an implementation date of 1st of June 2024. Whenever a fresh car is come out, the DGCA puts it up on a public website where all the interested parties can comment upon it and give a feedback.
If I
This
may interject there, those dates are important because it actually tells you how much time IndiGo had to implement this.
I'm just coming to that.
Yeah.
So the implementation date was the 1st of June 2024. So everybody, including IndiGo, knew what was coming. Now, if you examine just one aspect of the changes that were introduced by the car, of just this increase in the 12-hour rest period, when you translate it into a week, which consists of 168 hours, it impacts roughly 15% of the time that is available for a scheduled air transport operator, which he would be losing each week. Now, this translates in turn, coupled with the other restrictions of night flying, to roughly about a 20% increase from any current pilot strength. This was a given.
Got it.
This was
So the point is that most people believe that the IndiGo thought it could manage without hiring these extra numbers and found that it couldn't. Am I right? I just want to go. I see Wing Commander and Dilip raising their hands. So briefly, Captain Panikkar. Yeah.
See, the first time that this went to the court, it was a sort of a victory for IndiGo. Because the court, the Delhi High Court, which has jurisdiction on the matter since the DGCA is in Delhi, had ruled that out of the 22 clauses of the changes primarily, 15 would be implemented from the 1st of July and the remaining 7 from the 1st of November. So if you look at it from a timescale perspective, IndiGo had bought itself almost a year and a half, in which technically it needed to do nothing. It had gained this amount of time and had got a victory of sorts. Perhaps they thought that they would get a further extension. Perhaps they thought that they could keep the car in indefinite.
Well, either way, let me bring in the others now. Either way, there is a certain exceptionalism, Dilip, if I may call it that. I think what's really galling, there's the flight safety concerns, there's the discomfort to the passengers, but what's really contentious is that for one company, the norms were actually rolled back. It's a kind of exceptionalism in government policy. How do you see that, Dilip Cherian?
Making level, the problem begins with allowing one airline to have 70% of market share. In pure economic policy, that results in all kinds of anomalies within the policy framework, because you can't reprimand them, you can't ground them, because you will actually be disrupting an entire industry. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that when a company like this, which is a listed company, which incidentally has lost 4% of its value today on the stock market, but the fact is that this is a company which is board managed. And suppose the DGCA were to be either incompetent or incapable of monitoring this process, just the sheer regulatory requirement would be a subject matter in every board meeting that the company is not meeting the requirements that it is expected to follow. So in a sense, the failure also goes to the board, because having sat on several company boards, I know that when a norm which is in place, which is the CAR in this case, is in place, it is the duty of the management to report to the board whether it is working towards complying. So what you talk about about a gigantic virtual monopoly playing in a market which is growing at 15%, then government feels its hands are tied, because any punishment will actually result in punishment to the customer, even though, as you said very correctly, safety is being flouted. But it goes well beyond safety. It's got to do with the fact that an entire industry has been globally shamed, and across the world, people are looking at the aviation sector during the winter time when you have the maximum tourists coming in, when you have this kind of disruption.
Yeah. Wing Commander Dr. Bakshi, you wanted to come in?
I would suggest that Barkha, when the rules prove a point, all right, but they do not get translated on the ground, then it's a problem. We have. You can win a victory by bringing a lot of rules. Yeah, we have right. IndiGo was wrong. Then what? What do you do after that? You are back to normal, because your people will keep suffering because you don't have the will to do the change, and because there are no people who have suggested the change. The change is so difficult. I mean, difficult in the sense to accept because of ego problems, that it will not come. This is not related to one airline. This is a problem in a lot of places. It has happened. What I'm trying to tell you, I'm going beyond IndiGo, that this problem will only change if DGCA changes its functions. Beautiful rules have been, the captain have brought a very nice rule. All right, exceptional. But then what? Again, we are the same, because they have loopholes, because the High Court and the judicial system.
So you're saying the problem, you're saying, Dr. Bakshi, the problem is the DGCA's lack of autonomy or lack of willingness to assert that autonomy?
First thing is, they do not know how to assert that autonomy. Lack of professionals in the DGCA. That is the first problem. If you solve that problem, you will see the change coming up. It is not. First thing, why should bureaucracy be there? In one channel, I had challenged the DGCA chairman. How do you occupy this chair? Who made you? Because you are a bureaucrat? Then nobody had to an answer. I have done it on NDTV. I can do it anywhere. The question is, I'm not a tiger. I can only tell the truth. And this is the truth, that you don't have professionals. You are making rules. You're going to the lawyers, the things, and that's what you keep doing. How long will you do that? Other airlines who have been run by experts and honest experts, they brought the change.
Okay.
There's no problem.
So you have raised one point. There are not enough professionals in the DGCA. Why are bureaucrats sitting there instead of professionals?
That's right.
I can see Dilip agreeing. Let's take final comments. I'll come to you, Captain Panikkar. What now? What now? Because other airlines will now have the same dispensation as IndiGo. These norms have to be implemented. They're global standard. What happens? What should pilots be doing? I hope we've all seen the open letter written by an IndiGo staffer, which is viral. It's all over the social media. It talks about this being an engineered crisis, how everyone in the airline knew it was coming, saw it coming, and nobody did anything about it. What now, Captain Panikkar?
Okay. I think what IndiGo did was pure blackmail. It saw both the government as well as the regulator as relatively soft targets that would capitulate. And capitulate they did, because they've given them an extension till the 10th of February. But seriously, I do not think that even with this 2-month grace period which they've got, they are going to come up with the required numbers to meet all their commitments. But the fact of the matter is that both the regulator and the government at all stages were aware exactly of what was happening in IndiGo. Regular audits do take place. There is a FOI who will be looking after IndiGo as a principal FOI. During his interactions with them and knowing what are the impositions that come with the new car, what are the expansion plans, he should have been in the know. Thereby the DGCA is in the know. And by natural extension, so is the ministry. So there is a systemic failure at all points in time, with IndiGo believing that they could get away with it and riding the fine line between what is possible, what is not possible.
So if you had to decide whose head should roll, you seem to be saying that apart from the airline, heads need to roll in DGCA and the Ministry of Civil Aviation, Captain Panikkar.
See, they have set up a
Inquiry.
committee, yeah,
Yes.
to find out exactly what went wrong. Now, if you look at the composition of the team, it is like the DGCA investigating itself, right? Because all
Yeah.
the 4 members are from the DGCA. You've got a joint director, you've got one more person, and you've got 2 FOIs, right? It's like carrying out a self-audit of itself. But the
Yeah.
objective would be to find out that despite knowing the timelines, despite knowing the constraints, why is it that the airline deliberately did not do any inductions? Did they believe that they could get away with it? Did they
Yeah.
believe that there was something else to it? And to have this peculiar timing to coincide with the arrival of President of Putin. Do remember that the norms had come in with effect from November 1st. And it's almost a month later that this
Yeah.
entire system crashed down.
I mean, the IndiGo story outpaced Putin's visit. It took up more space in media than the Russian president's visit. And that's an interesting point that you make. Before I give Dilip the last word, Dr. Bakshi, you have said that the problem is not enough professionals in the DGCA. Captain Panikkar points out that the inquiry, he doesn't use the word farce, I'm using it, that the inquiry is farcical because it's like the DGCA investigating itself. So, where do you think the buck stops, Dr. Bakshi?
The buck will stop that the minister must answer that what action is being taken and what steps are they going to take to make recommendations in DGCA change and make them answer. Why not? That the simple problem, we have so many aviators who are directly dealing with aviation technology, flying, everything. Why are they sitting out and the bureaucrats sitting there? This is what it is. Barkha, either it is day or it is night. There is nothing in between like this if you're going to talk.
Yeah.
So we have to go face the fact. Fact is, until DGCA improves itself, nothing will improve in India. You will keep haggling around the rules, and that's all. Let's not.
Well, if this doesn't wake us up, then I don't know what will. We have, before I give Dilip Cherry in the last word, Saurav Vishis says in our audience, India's civil aviation industry and authorities have come across as rank amateurs in the past few months with confused committees, botched reports, and a laissez-faire attitude, a sab chalta hai attitude, which is probably what Dilip, as Captain Panikkar thought, IndiGo thought it could get away because it had so far, or maybe just because of, as you pointed out, the sheer amount of market share they control, they believe that they're invincible. So where does the buck stop? What happens now? The minister's in the hot seat. He can't get away without answering either. Last word to you, Dilip.
The scoop at the moment, Barkha, is that IndiGo has actually told the ministry that they need more days to do a sourcing of where the fault lies.
Correct.
So
they have said,
actually,
if I may just share those details, they have actually said in their reply to the DGCA that they
Yeah.
cannot pinpoint a single cause of crisis and they need much
That's
more
right.
time to investigate it. Go ahead now. Yeah.
So if they can't do a root cause analysis, then the minister's comment earlier in the day today that it's a good time to launch another airline is actually valid. What the DGCA perhaps needs to do is ease the norms of hiring, i.e., poaching pilots, because clearly there is a toxic mess going on, and IndiGo thinks that it can actually arm twist the ministry into giving it more time when they're supposed to come up with answers of a preliminary kind by December 10th. It does not require rocket science to know where the buck stops. The buck stops with the fact that the airline knew and willingly refused to do what is commercially required to do it. So, there are people who say that much more stern action needs to be made, but certainly no extra time is needed to figure out where the fault lines are.
Absolutely, and I think the government and the regulator will be watched very, very closely in the days to come on whether they allow this to slip from public memory or whether they in fact act against IndiGo. But the point has also been made that someone needs to investigate the DGCA. How did the DGCA slip up? What was the ministry doing? These questions, there are many questions for the airline, but there are also questions for both the government and the regulator, which our experts believe are not even are not even peopled by experts, but are peopled by bureaucrats who are not necessarily aviation experts. We leave it there. Dilip Cherian, Captain Panikkar, and Wing Commander Bakshi, always a pleasure. To our audience, keep watching. I hope you're not stranded at an airport somewhere. If you are, please raise your voice, not just because you can't get to where you need to get to, but because this is a flight safety issue that impacts us all. Thank you so much. See you all soon.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.